In a world where quick comebacks and loud reactions dominate, one young man chose a different path. At an exclusive business summit where Barron Trump, the youngest person in the room, stunned an audience of top executives with a response no one saw coming. Get ready for a story of poise, wisdom, and quiet strength, because sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that remains calm. The Ritz-Carlton Conference Hall in New York City gleamed under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, its air thick with quiet power and prestige. This was no ordinary gathering. It was an exclusive business summit, where some of the most influential CEOs, investors, and entrepreneurs had convened for an evening of networking, insights, and industry discussions. Conversations hummed throughout the lavish room as attendees exchanged firm handshakes and discussed market trends, financial forecasts, and global business strategies. Among them sat 18-year-old Barron Trump, a guest of a respected mentor who had invited him to observe the world of high-stakes business firsthand. Unlike the seasoned professionals around him, Barron did not engage in casual small talk or boast about ventures. Instead, he listened, watched, and absorbed, his tall frame composed and his piercing blue eyes scanning the room with quiet curiosity. Though he was the youngest person in attendance, Barron carried himself with an effortless poise that set him apart. He had no intention of standing out, yet his presence did not go unnoticed. Some attendees whispered, recognizing him instantly, while others stole glances, intrigued by his quiet demeanor. For Barron, this evening was about learning, not proving himself, not making a statement, just understanding the landscape of leadership and business. The event carried a formal yet electric atmosphere, a space where billion-dollar deals were casually discussed over cocktails, and where power wasn't just spoken, it was felt. But soon, the energy in the room would shift. A keynote speaker, known for their sharp opinions and controversial humor, was about to take the stage, and what began as a routine business discussion would soon turn into an unforgettable lesson on leadership, dignity, and the power of words. As the evening progressed, the anticipation in the room grew. The business summit had already featured insightful discussions, but the true highlight was yet to come: the keynote address. All eyes turned toward the stage as the event's host stepped forward, microphone in hand. With a confident smile, they announced the arrival of the evening's featured speaker, a renowned venture capitalist known just as much for their bold business strategies as their unfiltered opinions. The speaker entered with a commanding presence, exuding confidence as they strode toward the podium. Dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, they greeted the audience with a charismatic grin, their reputation preceding them. Some in the crowd leaned forward eagerly, ready for provocative insights, while others exchanged knowing glances. This was someone who had a history of pushing boundaries, mixing financial wisdom with biting commentary. The opening moments of their speech were engaging, even entertaining. They started with a few light-hearted remarks about the business world, throwing in a joke about volatile markets and the unpredictability of startups. The audience responded warmly, chuckling as the speakers shared anecdotes about past investments, industry missteps, and the unpredictability of success. Yet, beneath the polished delivery, there was an undercurrent of expectation. Those familiar with the speaker's style knew that their monologues often carried a sharp edge, and tonight would be no different. As the speech continued, the tone began to shift. What started as insightful business commentary soon veered into bolder, more controversial territory. And within moments, the focus of their remarks would take an unexpected and personal turn toward Barron Trump. At first, the keynote speaker's remarks were exactly what the audience expected: sharp, insightful, and laced with humor. They spoke about market trends, leadership failures, and the future of investment, peppering their speech with anecdotes that earned occasional laughter from the crowd. But as their confidence grew, so did the boldness of their commentary. Their humor, once focused on industry insights, began to veer into satire, targeting public figures, politicians, and high-profile business magnates. The shift was subtle, at first mentioning leaders who had failed upward in corporate America, then poking fun at billionaire heirs who had everything handed to them. The audience chuckled uneasily, aware of the speaker's reputation for pushing limits. Then, with a calculated smirk, they landed on Barron Trump. "Of course we can't forget about the future generation of business leaders," the speaker quipped. "Or should I say, those born with business in their blood? You know, the ones who grew up in gold-plated towers while the rest of us hustled just to pay rent." A few chuckles rippled through the room, but many attendees stiffened, glancing at Barron, who sat motionless. The speaker continued, their tone feigning amusement. "Imagine growing up knowing your name alone opens doors before you've even knocked. What a fascinating business model! Success by birthright!" Some members of the audience exchanged uneasy glances, recognizing the shift from industry satire to a pointed jab. For the first time that evening, the energy in the room felt uncomfortable. A few guests shifted in their seats, unsure of how to react. It was one thing to comment on politics or the economy, but targeting someone sitting in the room, especially an 18-year-old who had remained silent and respectful all evening, was different. Still, the speaker pressed on. "Barron, tell us, did they teach negotiation tactics in your penthouse, or do you just inherit the deals?" The laughter was noticeably weaker now, scattered and nervous. Some attendees avoided looking in Barron's direction altogether, while others waited to see his reaction. But Barron didn't flinch, he didn't shrink back, nor did he respond with frustration. Instead, he remained perfectly composed, his expression calm, his hands resting lightly on the table. The room had expected amusement, maybe even an awkward chuckle. Instead, what followed was a tense, expectant silence, and as the speaker faltered slightly, realizing the moment was not landing as intended, all eyes turned to Barron, waiting to see what he would do next. The moment the speaker's final remark echoed through the grand hall, the energy in the room shifted. What had started as playful banter had now turned into something else entirely. An uncomfortable spotlight placed squarely on Barron Trump. The usual murmur of polite chuckles and whispered side conversations faded into an eerie silence. All eyes turned toward Barron. But instead of flushing with embarrassment, laughing awkwardly, or reacting in anger, Barron remained composed, unmoved, and utterly unreadable. Seated at his table, his tall frame relaxed, he made no immediate effort to respond. He simply studied the speaker, his piercing blue eyes calm yet unwavering. It was as if he was assessing them, not as a teenager caught in an awkward moment, but as someone who had been in the public eye long enough to recognize exactly what was happening. The stillness in the room grew heavier by the second. Even those who had laughed moments earlier began to feel the weight of what had just happened. This wasn't just a joke about privilege or politics. It was a personal attack disguised as humor. People in the audience exchanged nervous glances, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The speaker, who had once commanded the stage effortlessly, now hesitated, gripping the podium slightly tighter, as if sensing the shift in power. They had likely expected some reaction from Barron, maybe an embarrassed chuckle, a shrug, or even a defensive remark. But his silence was deafening. The poised, unaffected way he sat, unshaken and unbothered, carried more weight than any words could. It wasn't apathy, it was something stronger, an unspoken statement that said, "I hear you, I see you, but I am not moved." Even the speaker now seemed uncertain. Clearing their throat, they attempted to recover, offering a nervous chuckle. "Tough crowd," they muttered into the microphone, forcing an uneasy smile. But the usual charisma that carried their speeches so effortlessly was gone. And then, Barron moved. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed back his chair and stood up. The soft scrape of the chair against the floor was the only sound in the room. At just over 6 feet tall, his presence was imposing, commanding attention in a way that required no effort. As he took his first step toward the stage, the entire room held its breath. No one knew what he would say, but one thing was clear. This moment no longer belonged to the speaker. It now belonged to Barron Trump. As Barron Trump approached the stage, the entire room seemed to shrink in around him, drawn into the gravity of the moment. He walked with measured, deliberate steps, his expression as calm as it had been all evening. Unlike the speaker, who had commanded attention with charisma and provocation, Barron's presence alone commanded silence. Stopping just a few feet from the podium, he looked directly at the speaker, not with hostility, not with amusement, but with something far more unsettling: quiet confidence. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, controlled, and far more powerful than any witty comeback could have been. "Thank you for your insight," he began, his tone even, devoid of sarcasm or anger. The words caught the speaker and the audience off guard. There was no bitterness, no indignation, only a composure that felt far beyond his 18 years. "I've grown up watching people make assumptions about me, my family, and my life," Barron continued, his gaze unwavering. "It's almost become a game to some, a way to fill in the gaps when they don't know the full story. And I understand that. Being in the public eye means people will talk. It comes with the territory." The room remained utterly still, the weight of his words sinking in with each passing second. Even those who had chuckled at the earlier jokes now sat motionless, their expressions tinged with unease. This wasn't just a response, it was a reflection, a challenge to the room itself. "But there's something important that often gets overlooked," Barron continued, his voice gaining a quiet intensity. "Behind every headline, behind every punchline, there's a human being, someone with their own struggles, their own dreams, and their own story. You may think you know me because of my last name, but you don't. Not really." The speaker, once brimming with confidence, now looked visibly uncomfortable, gripping the edge of the podium. Barron wasn't attacking them. He was holding up a mirror, forcing them and the audience to reconsider the weight of their words. "What I've learned," Barron said, pausing for just a moment, "is that respect doesn't have to be earned. It should be given freely, especially when you don't know someone's full story." A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. This wasn't just about one moment at a business summit. It was about a larger truth, one that many had ignored for too long. Barron turned slightly, addressing not just the speaker but everyone in the room. "We live in a time where it's easy to tear each other down," he said, his voice steady but filled with quiet conviction. "Words have power. They can hurt or they can heal. They can divide or they can unite. And I think we could all use a little more of the latter." The audience was spellbound. Barron wasn't just responding to a personal attack, he was redefining the conversation. It was clear that he wasn't just speaking for himself, but for anyone who had ever been misjudged, mocked, or reduced to a stereotype. Finally, he took a step back, locking eyes with the speaker once more. "I hope this gives you something to think about," he said softly. Then, without waiting for applause, he turned and walked back to his seat. The silence in the room was deafening. As Barron Trump returned to his seat, the weight of his words hung in selfie air, thick and unshakable. The speaker, once so effortlessly commanding, now stood frozen at the podium, gripping its edges as if searching for stability. For the first time that evening, they seemed genuinely at a loss for words. The confident smirk that had accompanied their earlier remarks was gone, replaced by something far more unfamiliar: introspection. A nervous chuckle escaped their lips as they adjusted their stance, clearly attempting to regain their footing. "Well," they finally said, forcing a half smile, "I wasn't expecting a leadership lesson from the youngest guy in the room, but point taken." A few polite laughs rippled through the audience, but the usual energy of their speeches had been dampened, replaced by something more subdued. They exhaled, glancing down for a brief moment before looking back up at Barron. "You make a fair point," they admitted, their tone noticeably softer. "It's easy to forget the people behind the headlines. Maybe we should all think about that a little more." It wasn't a direct apology, but it was as close as one could expect from someone who had built a career on blunt critiques and sharp humor. And yet, the power dynamic in the room had unmistakably shifted. Barron, without insult or aggression, had transformed the conversation. The audience remained quiet, processing what had just unfolded. For the first time that night, the venture capitalist, the seasoned professional, the industry leader, wasn't the most powerful person in the room. For a moment, the Ritz-Carlton conference hall was silent, the weight of what had just unfolded settling over the audience. Then a single clap broke through the quiet. Another followed, and then another. Within seconds, the entire room erupted into applause, growing into a thunderous standing ovation. Unlike the polite claps that had greeted the speaker earlier, this applause was genuine, filled with admiration, not just for Barron's words, but for his poise and maturity. Some guests exchanged hushed, amazed whispers, while others simply stood, reflecting on what they had just witnessed. At his table, Barron remained composed, offering only a polite nod. He didn't revel in the applause, nor did he act as though he had won a debate. His demeanor remained unchanged, calm, thoughtful, and quietly confident. The venture capitalist, still at the podium, shifted uneasily. They attempted to regain control of the moment, but the room had already moved on. The energy had changed, not because Barron had humiliated them, but because he had demonstrated leadership in a way no one expected. By the time the event ended, whispers of Barron's response had already spread. Attendees discreetly checked their phones as clips of his speech went viral on social media. Within hours, Barron Trump was trending. News outlets picked up the story the next morning. Some praised his wisdom and restraint, while others debated whether he should have been a target for public commentary at all. Yet while the world analyzed his words, Barron himself remained unfazed. For those in the room, the lesson was clear. True leadership isn't about the loudest voice, but about using words to inspire respect. Long after the applause faded, Barron Trump's words continued to resonate. His response wasn't just a clever comeback, it was a lesson in leadership, dignity, and restraint. In a world where public figures often react with outrage, he demonstrated the power of quiet confidence. Barron's response wasn't about defending himself, it was about challenging how we speak about others, especially those judged by assumptions and headlines. Instead of retaliating, he turned public ridicule into reflection, making the audience, and ultimately the world, reconsider the weight of their words and the responsibility of having a voice. A media storm followed. News anchors, talk shows, and social media dissected the moment. Some praised Barron's maturity, calling it a defining moment in his emergence as a voice of his own. Others questioned whether young public figures should ever be targets of such commentary. Yet, through it all, Barron remained unfazed. He didn't seek attention or engage in the frenzy. Instead, he let his words speak for themselves, like true leaders do. The biggest takeaway? Leadership isn't about volume, but about impact. It's about choosing words that build, not destroy, about thoughtfulness over impulse. In an era of hostility and division, Barron Trump's response showed a different path, one of quiet strength, respect, and integrity. And in the end, it wasn't just about him, it was about all of us. It left us with a question worth asking: are we using our words to divide or to unite?